The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, I came to cast fire upon the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how I am constrained until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For henceforth, in one house, there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against her mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Lead questions for today. Question number 1. What is the overriding theme that runs through all of today's readings? Question 2. Identify the sentence in our second reading, Hebrews 2:1-4, which urges us to embrace deferred gratification, to reject instant gratification and embrace deferred gratification. What is that sentence in the second reading? Question 3, Jesus says, I have come to bring fire and division on it. Very strange statement from Jesus. What kind of fire has Jesus brought to the world? And how do we reconcile the Jesus that is the Prince of Peace with the Jesus who brings fire and division? How do we reconcile the two Jesuses? Question 4, quote, standing for something often means standing against many things. To stand for something is to stand against many things. How does this statement challenge us, Nigerian Christians of today? How does it challenge us? How does it challenge you? Yes, what do you mean?
I'd like to answer question 1.
Go ahead.
The overriding theme of today is the cost of discipleship.
The overriding theme is the cost of discipleship. Give her a round of applause. The cost. What discipleship costs. It is not free. It costs something. Yes. Okay. This is your girl self.
I want to answer question.
What do they call this one? The one that has this gear on the right.
I want to answer question.
What do they call this one?
I don't know.
You don't know the name. You find out before the next time you are going to donate like this, you find out. Okay.
I want to answer question 4.
Okay.
Standing for something often means standing against many things. How does this statement challenge us, Nigerian Christians of today? If you don't stand for something, as you said, Father, you fall for anything.
If you don't stand for something, you fall for it. By the way, your grandmother has the same kind of gele. Only that her own is facing a different direction. Okay, so if you don't stand up for something,
Fall for anything.
you will fall for anything.
And another way to say that is that you follow the bandwagon. So
If you don't stand for something, you will follow. You are likely to follow a bandwagon. Do we all understand that?
How it challenges us Nigerian Christians.
Wait a minute. If you don't stand up for something, you will follow the bandwagon. So what stops you from following the bandwagon is that you
Stand for something.
Are we all together?
Yes.
What stops you from following the bandwagon? There is always a temptation to follow the bandwagon. So what stops us from following the bandwagon is that you are standing up for something. Okay.
And that something is our values as Christians.
Our set of values as Christians, like
fear of God, charity, discipline. These values help us to stand strong in our discipleship. And when we're standing for these values, there's a tendency that all we like to gain will no longer have them.
when we stand up for perhaps something more fundamental that we stand for rather than charity, this and that, because, charity, even pagans have charity, isn't it? It's not only Christians that have charity, that have discipline. There are pagans that are more disciplined than many Christians. So there's something more fundamental that we stand for. Can you think about it?
The cross.
God's time. Can you think of something to help her? Something more fundamental than charity and justice and this. More fundamental. Truth. Yeah, we stand for God and for His goodness. That's what I wanted. You stand for God, and it is from what you stand for that all these other values flow, isn't it?
Yes.
It is not, like I said, if it is true, there are people who are not Christians and who are disciplined and who are charitable and so on. But what we stand for is that we stand for Christ. And if you stand for Christ, all this and more
Follow.
So if you stand, let's say we stand for Christ, that's what you stand for. Then you will lose. How did you put it?
There's a tendency that all you like to gain, you no longer have them.
You will not be able to gain everything that you desire in your human mind.
Yes.
Oh, you have brought the mind of church mind and human mind. Mike is not here to tell us more about that. Such as, what is the example you can give us of when you are standing for Christ, then there is something you may lose? Any example?
You may lose friends that are encouraging you to do what is against your values.
You may lose friends that want you to join the bandwagon. You may lose such friends.
Yes.
And is it possible that you really like some of those friends?
Yes.
And you would have liked to go along with them?
Yes. But that's the cost of discipleship.
Give her a round of applause. That is the cost. Accepting to lose such friends is part of the cost of discipleship. You can't eat your cake and have it. Thank you. Yes.
To answer question 3.
Question 3.
The
Fire.
kind of fire that Jesus has brought to the world, the fire of truth.
It's not Holy Ghost fire.
So because
This one is fire of
truth.
So truth has fire.
Yes, and truth often causes division.
Truth often causes division.
Yes, because when people don't agree with the truth, the few that have the truth often have to stand alone.
Those who live by the truth often have to stand alone. How do you know that at your age? How do you know that at your age? That those who do not, who stand for truth often have to stand alone. And do people like standing alone? Do people like standing alone?
So that is why many people often
fall by the wayside. Because people don't like standing alone, that is why many will fall by the wayside. So truth has fire.
Yes. So how we can reconcile Jesus, the Prince of Peace, with the Jesus who brings fire and division? It's because the Jesus who brings fire and division brings truth, and those who agree by the truth one day will be reconciled with the Prince of Peace.
So those who stand by the truth will experience conflict with those who reject the truth, who want to continue to live in falsehood, and therefore there will be conflict. Actually, I think Jesus was thinking of Nigeria when he was talking of this mother-in-law and especially daughter-in-law and he was thinking of Nigeria, really. Now, but in the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law conflicts in Nigeria, is it about issues of truth? Often it is not, isn't it? It's on more petty issues, more vain issues. More vain issues than the issue of standing for truth or against truth. And in standing for truth or against truth, who is often standing for truth and against in mother-in-law, for mother-in-law or daughter-in-law? Who is often on the side of truth? None of them. Look at the mother-in-laws here and the father and the daughters-in-law. They say none of you, whether mother-in-law or daughter-in-law, stand for truth. None of them. Hiya. Okay, so I hope you are not hearing this one we are saying. Those who stand for truth, truth is fire. And that fire causes division. That fire causes conflict to the extent that many people hate to hear the truth. So the few who stand for truth will be isolated. The few who stand for truth, there will be conflict. And then, as we said before, they stand alone, and that is part of the cost of discipleship. Give him a round of applause. Jeremiah, the prophet, who is a troublemaker. When people call me troublemaker, I said maybe I am beginning to behave like Jeremiah. Jeremiah loved his people very dearly. People who make trouble like this are generally people who love their people dearly, to the extent that they are ready for trouble on account of the love they have for their people. But often their people misunderstand that point, because it challenges their comfort zone. He loved the people dearly, but he loved God and the truth even more. At a time of moral decay and political turmoil, Jeremiah predicted an oncoming catastrophe, like the revenge of the poor. Right? An oncoming catastrophe. That if you do not change your course, my dear people, you will end up where you are headed. And it is a truism. There's nothing strange there. That if you are facing the wrong direction, if you do not change your direction, you will end up in the wrong place. That's supposed to be an innocent statement. That where I see my people facing, the direction I see my people going, if they do not change, you will end up in destruction. Because every other group of people that have taken that direction before have ended up in destruction. But do people like to hear that? No. He warned that the people would soon be defeated and humiliated by their enemies if they do not repent. Now, you remember what the king was told? The king was told, give us permission to kill this guy because he is demoralizing our army. If the army, the military, the navy, the air force, if they hear this, they will be demoralized. The prophet saying that you guys are going to be defeated. No. You know what you do with armies is that you pep them up. That they are winning. They are going to win. So they went to him and they said, look, the chief of army staff and others went to him and said, look, this prophet is demoralizing our soldiers. Then the king, that Mumu king, the king said, he's in your hands. You know that I have no power. Whatever you people decide, I have no power. And you know that when another person went to the king and said, look, oh, they are killing Jeremiah. He said, oh, okay, go and save him. Now, Jeremiah accused the false prophets of appealing to popular sentiments. This is not new, right? And sounds familiar. He accused the false prophets of appealing to popular sentiments, preaching prosperity, and prophesying peace where there was no basis for peace. You see, there are things that make for peace. In the Pope's New Year messages for many years, the Pope often speaks of the justice that makes for peace. Peace does not just happen. Peace is the fruit of justice. If there is no justice, and prosperity preachers are talking of peace and peace and peace, it has no basis, no foundation. You have the level of corruption that we have. You have the level of destitution we have. You have the level of injustice we have in society. And everybody is preaching prosperity. You are joking. That prosperity is standing on which foundation? So the real prophet of God will tell you that this level of rot in this country is going to lead to destruction, not prosperity. And the real prophet will tell the children, those who say they are children of God, they are Christians, that look, if you are a real Christian, you cannot be part of this rot. And if you are part of this rot, you will perish with the rest of the people. The real prophet of God is not going to preach prosperity with a level of rot in the Nigerian society today. All the leaders of the society were enraged. Enraged. The king, the princes, the army, they hired all false prophets, the political and economic elite, and the religious authorities. They were all enraged. They were fed up with Jeremiah's message of doom and gloom. They were determined to get rid of him. They threw him into prison, but even in prison, he did not keep his mouth shut. He continued to harass the soldiers with his message of doom and gloom. Then they took permission from the king and threw him into a well full of mud, so that he may drown and die a miserable death, bloody fool. But he was saved following the intervention of an Ethiopian friend of the king. It was an Ethiopian, a foreign visitor, who said, look at what they are doing to the prophet Jeremiah. He will die in that mud. And the king said, okay, go and bring him out. As a prophet, Jeremiah was an utter failure. Those of you who had problems with the disposition I took after I came back from my retreat, I wish you just go and read Jeremiah's story. The sense of failure I felt, similar to the sense of failure that Jeremiah had. As a prophet, he was an utter failure. He met a stone wall in the people. Nobody listened to him. Nobody gave a thought to his prophetic word. Jeremiah was now in conflict. He was in conflict with God. He was in conflict with the people. He was even in conflict with himself. And it is precisely this kind of thing that I meant when I said I was in crisis. Looking at the situation and looking at the fact that it's as if nothing is happening. It is normal in the life of any human being at some point to begin to assess himself or herself. What's going on? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? So he was questioning God who sent him on this message. He was questioning the people who refused to listen and beginning to question himself whether he was in the right place or doing the right thing. In his distress, he exclaimed, "You have seduced me, Lord, and I have allowed myself to be seduced. You have overpowered me. I am a laughing stock all day long. They all make fun of me. What kind of life is this? For me, the Lord's word has been a cause of insult and derision all day long. Why did I come out of my mother's womb only to see toil and sorrow and end my days in shame?" Jeremiah 27:9. Jeremiah was hated and isolated because of his fidelity to God and his commitment to the truth. His words, his message, his values unsettled a lot of people and brought conflict and division. Jeremiah did not do violence to anyone. But because he stood for godly values, those who were comfortable with the status quo always saw him as a dangerous fellow. He so irritated the people that they got rid of him. Thus, he paid the ultimate price for truth with his life. Now, Jesus, in the same fashion of Jeremiah, came and said, I come to bring fire and division. As you know, Jesus did not say this at the beginning of his ministry. He said it towards the end. At the beginning of his ministry, as you see in Luke chapter 4, he says, I have come with the Spirit of the Lord to open the eyes of the blind, to set the captives free, to declare the Lord's year of favor. Wonderful, good news. But towards the end, he began to say some harsh things. You could see a sense of frustration in Jesus towards the end. And that is why Jesus Christ said at some point, when the Son of Man comes on earth, will he find any faith on earth? Will he find any faith on earth? So towards the end of Jesus' ministry, he too was getting, what's going on here? Will there be anybody really believing? And as you see in chapter 6 of John's Gospel, from verse 59, you could see when Jesus started talking about his body being food, and people began to go away because they didn't want to accept that truth. The 5,000 people who fed, whom he fed miraculously, they all went away. There was division, there was conflict because they would not accept his truth. Jesus turned on the 12 and said, if you want to go too, you can go. Do you think that was a happy statement? But he was ready to lose even the 12. I am not going to compromise my message. Accept it or leave it. Even you, if you want to go, you can go also. I use this story of Jeremiah and use these statements of Jesus to recognize the fact that Jesus, when I said something about numbers, people got so afraid that, it should be joy for you that many people believe in Christ now. Yeah, but Jesus did not compromise anything in order to have number. Do you recognize that? Even the 12, he was ready to lose them, but he was not going to adjust his message. The hard message of Jesus was not to be adjusted. So even you, the 12, even you in Luke's Terra, if you want to go, you can go. And that wouldn't be strange. That's coming from Jesus. But the truth of the gospel should not be adjusted. And I say that we have gotten carried away in this society with numbers. And that is why we are making no impact whatsoever. Little or no impact, because we are carried away by numbers. But the real message of Jesus turns out that it may not be for the majority of people. The majority of people will continue to reject it because it is hard. Jesus says, I came to cast fire on it, and how I wish it were already burning. Again he says, do you think I have come to bring peace on it? No, I tell you, not peace, but division. This appears to contradict all we know about Jesus, that Prince of Peace that Isaiah speaks about. In Matthew chapter 5 verse 9 he says, blessed are the peacemakers. In John chapter 14 verse 27 he promised his disciples the peace which the world cannot give. So what fire has Jesus come to kindle? It is the fire of the Holy Spirit. The fire of the Holy Spirit. The fire that cleanses and purifies. Like fire purifies gold. The fire of God's presence. God's presence. Many times when God appeared in the Old Testament, he appeared in fire. The image of fire, like Moses seeing the bush burning. Or as in the Exodus pillar of fire. Or as in the tongues of fire at Pentecost. The fire of God's love that set aflame the heart of the faithful. It is the fire of God's love that makes the faithful so eager, so passionate. The message of Christ is clearly non-violent. There is no question that Jesus is not violent. His message promotes love and forgiveness and compassion and harmony and unity and peace. But the message of Jesus also challenges those guilty of idolatry in all its manifestations. Idolatry in all its manifestations. And today, when we talk of idolatry, please take your mind off just going to the shrine as our grandfathers used to do. There are perhaps there are more idolatrous people today than during my grandfather's time. More idolatrous people. Idolatry of money, idolatry of power, idolatry of pleasure. Whatever takes your mind, engages you too powerfully. I mean, I do say it that when I am talking about Jesus, talking about prayer, talking about devotions and so on, you could see many people in church cold like a camo of yesterday. But when you begin to speak about Chelsea and Manchester United, then you see the man in them. That's your idol. Do you understand? That's your idol. That's your God. What causes you what generates such passion in you? That's your idol, my brothers and sisters. If it is the world that gets you so excited that you cannot pay attention to anything once it's on, that's your idol. It's not bowing to some rock or some tree. It is what is it that generates such passion, such fire in you that other things don't matter. That has become your idol. If it is social media, to the extent that you cannot sit down in church for 2 hours without going to check your phone, that's becoming your idol. So, idolatry in all its manifestations, social injustice in all its forms, discrimination of all kinds, corruption and dishonesty, the arrogance of power, ethnic and racial bigotry. Some people are so devoted, and mark the words I'm using, so devoted to their ethnic group that nothing else is important. That devotion is what? Idolatry. Some people are so devoted to family, to parents or to children, to my mother, to my father, that nothing else matters, and they are ready to violate every Christian value in order to satisfy mother or satisfy father or that devotion to family is what? Idolatry. Jesus says, I have come to bring division. So if my mother's interest is going to make me violate God's commandment, Jesus says, cut it off. If your right hand makes you sin, cut it off. If I am not ready to cut it off and I am ready to keep compromising, that's my idol. The abuse of human rights and dignity, the insensitivity of the rich towards the poor, those who live as if life has no purpose beyond here. Jesus' message challenges very powerfully those who live as if life is not beyond here. We have constantly spoken of the difference between this worldly ultimate values and transcendental ultimate values. What Christianity has brought is to take the focus of human beings from just this world and being riveted, being tied to earth, which is the source of all sin. I said a few days ago on my anniversary that attachment is the source of all sin. Attachment. When people are too attached to anything, and Jesus says, don't let anything hold you to this world too much. And the division he has brought is that cutting off from anything that will tie you down. Children, husband, wife, job, money, political position. If you allow any such thing to tie you too much to this world, then you have an idol. You have an idol. Even your own sense of self-respect. Your own sense of self-respect can become an idol. I hope you know that. Your own sense of self-respect can gradually become an idol. You are worshiping your image. Oh, of course. What do you call them now? The ones who decorate you if you are... Makeup artists, often what they do is to make an idol of yourself for you. Create an idol of yourself for you. And that's why you need to look at the mirror several times a day to worship your own image. You see, these things creep in. These things gradually creep in and people don't know. It is idolatry. Self-image worship. It's idolatry. You know, I told you how I was in the airport and I saw a lady with eyelashes that was like how many inches? And I said, oh, Ojuju Kalaba. The message of Jesus often does not have the same impact on the poor and the rich. The message of Jesus often comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. Can we say that together? The message of Jesus often does not have the same impact on the poor and the rich at the same time. The message of Jesus often comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. Those who are comfortable with the status quo, the message of Jesus afflicts them. Those who have been afflicted by an unjust system, the message of Jesus comforts them. That is why St. Paul calls the message of Jesus, the gospel, a double-edged. That's what it means, double-edged sword. That sword that at one and the same time comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. How Jesus' message causes conflict. How? Vested interests, beneficiaries of a corrupt status quo, the message of Jesus causes conflict with them, right? Those devoted to wealth and power, the message of Jesus causes conflict with them. They will do anything to keep the status quo. They will stoutly resist any change, and therefore the message of Jesus is meant to cause confusion, cause conflict. Though the gospel bearer, the prophet, does not desire to bring about conflict will inevitably result. It goes without saying. Conflict will result when anyone strives to fearlessly preach and courageously live out the values of the gospel in a corrupt, promiscuous, wicked, violent, exploitative, self-worshipping, and godless society. The message of Jesus will cause conflict. And the bearer of that message will now be the occasion for the conflict. In defending truth, justice, human dignity, and freedom, the Christian message will inevitably, what does it mean? What does inevitably mean? Certainly, you can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. Inevitably meet with opposition within families and in the wider society. On account of preaching the undiluted truth. A lot of what is preached these days is diluted to make it comfortable for people. On account of preaching the undiluted truth, the faithful Christian will be isolated and persecuted. The faithful Christian will be discredited and maligned. The faithful Christian will be abused and calumniated, will be mocked and derided. After saying, blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus also says, blessed are those persecuted for the sake of the gospel. You remember that? Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 to 12. Blessed are you when men persecute you, when they revile you, when they say all kinds of calumny against you on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Jesus was meek and humble, yes. Jesus was gentle, but when denouncing evil and proclaiming the truth, he was always firm. Jesus was not soft when he was denouncing evil. He didn't say, I beg you people, you see, I beg you, please help the poor, I beg. He was firm when denouncing injustice. He was decisive. He was uncompromising. When it comes to speaking against the oppression of the least of his brethren, of the children of God, he was firm. He wasn't soft like Akamo of yesterday. The message of Jesus was not always palatable. His preaching was not always crowd friendly. We like crowds, isn't it? We like crowds. There is a tendency for human beings who have not grown up, and that is the common denominator among teenagers, to want to be part of the crowd. So when you ask a young person, why are you wearing dirty jeans, or they call it distressed jeans, right? Why are you wearing distressed jeans? He said, that is the trend. So that is the trend. I say, if that is the trend out there, you don't wear that kind of thing in my presence. You are wearing it just in order to belong to the crowd. You have no other reason for wearing it. Just to belong. So it is a teenage behavior. It is the behavior of people who have not grown up. So when you see a full adult wearing distressed jeans, tell him, oh, so you have not grown up. The behavior of people who have not grown up is to want to belong to the crowd. But people who have grown up ask themselves, why am I wearing this? Do I really like it? I tell people, go to the mirror, look at yourself in the mirror and say, do I really like this? Not what is the trend. And I tell the young people close to me, I say, look, you set the trend. Don't follow any idiot trend. You set the trend. Let others follow you. That's why Jesus calls you the salt. He calls you the light. He calls you the living, so that you may set the tone. That's part of the reason why I set up Terra, so that we set the trend and not follow what others are doing. Jesus didn't preach prosperity and abundance. No, he didn't. Jesus knows that every human heart is looking for abundance, it's looking for prosperity. And that the truth is not often prosperous. The truth is not often abundant. Listening to Jesus was not always a sweet experience. Let's take note of that. Many times when people listened to Jesus, they reached out to carry a stone to throw at him. Thank God I have not been stoned. You guys are good, isn't it? You guys are good. You have not stoned me. Maybe some of you may be that there are no stones around here. Listening to Jesus was not always a sweet experience. I still remember, my days in the other big parish, that somebody who just finished constructing a 3-meter fence yesterday, and he's congratulating himself that he has this 3-meter fence that he has just tied around with barbed wire and electrified whatever. And then the next day in church, I am saying it is foolish to put those kind of fences. I mean, it's annoying, isn't it? It's really annoying. I mean, somebody who has just installed bulletproof doors, and then I come to church the next day and I'm saying, I mean, what a terrible thing to be living in prison and have 2-3 bulletproof doors before your room, that you are living in maximum security prison. It's annoying, isn't it? But is that the truth or not? So, listening to Jesus was not always a sweet experience. He did not seek to make himself popular with some sugar-coated message. No. Jesus was not a crowd puller. No. Jesus will not have had millions of fans on Facebook. No. His message is not the one that human beings easily want to embrace. Jesus says, whoever is not for me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. Matthew 12:30. Whoever does not gather with me scatters. So it's clear. The lines are drawn. It's clear. Jesus chose to disturb people because they needed to be disturbed. He cared so much about people that he disturbed them because they needed to be disturbed. He shocked some, he infuriated others. What Jesus taught brought him in conflict with the religious elite, with the political elite, with the economic elite. He called the scribes and the Pharisees blind guides. Where is that guy who said that I called some people idiots? And he says that Jesus called them blind guides, hypocrites, and whitewashed sepulchres. You know what whitewashed sepulchres are? That thing we do on top of the grave. So what is inside is rotten. Jesus' justice brought him in conflict with those who exploited the poor and the weak. Jesus' integrity brought him in conflict with the dishonest and the corrupt people. Jesus' tolerance brought him in conflict with the narrow-minded and racial bigots. Jesus stirred up so much hatred that he ended up being crucified. He provoked people to the extent that they just dragged him to the cross. It is said that the brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. Do you know that? The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. Jesus ended up the way he did because he was a prophet. Prophets are always persona non grata, persons that are not permitted to be around. Fire warms and comforts. So let me speak now about the gospel being a force for transformation. And I have always said here that the gospel is the most potent force for society, individual and societal transformation, unless we're not preaching the real gospel, unless we're not living out the real gospel. So if our society is as it is, as rotten as it is, if our society is as unjust as it is, it means we are not living out the gospel, because the gospel is the most powerful force, most powerful agent for individual and social transformation. Fire warms and comforts, but it also burns up what is useless and refines what is impure. That's what fire does. The gospel of Jesus is what? Fire. It is fire that burns up what is useless. It is fire that purifies what is impure. The gospel is the most potent agent of transformation. And I say, look at yourself, look at your family, and look at your society. If it is not being transformed, then it is not the gospel of Christ you are preaching. Something is wrong. Prophets and true bearers of the gospel are troublemakers in the best sense of the expression. Prophets and truth bearers are, what did I call them? Troublemakers. If a gospel preacher does not cause trouble, he is not preaching the gospel of Christ in a rotten, corrupt world. Am I confusing you? If a gospel preacher is not causing trouble in a corrupt world, he is not preaching the gospel of Christ. But what people often, there is no greater disturber of peace than the one who preaches justice and truth. Because people want to stay in their falsehood and have peace, the peace of the graveyard in their falsehood. But what people often call peace is no peace at all. A lot of what is considered normal today are an affront on the gospel of Christ. True or false? A lot of what is considered normal, we call it these days, we say the new normal. They are an affront on the gospel and the values of the kingdom. the widespread indiscipline in our land. You can't live the Christian life without discipline. You can't. So, indiscipline. Yesterday I read, there's a doctor, a Nigerian neurosurgeon in England who wrote an article about peacing. Peacing, how Nigerians peace anywhere and everywhere. Peacing. How Nigerians peace anywhere. In the middle of the road, Nigerian peace. He said it begins from mothers, that when a child says, "Mommy, I'm on a wee-wee," then there and there, mommy removes the dress and then he wee-wee. Then after he grows up a little, doesn't need mommy's permission again. Just anywhere he's pressed, he just pisses anywhere. He says that in England that people, something just happened, that somebody was sued to court for pissing in public. And the person was fined for pissing in public. And he said, for Nigerians, it's like, is that judge is stupid? What kind of nonsense is that? You are pressed, you piss. Now, that's for me a metaphor for our indiscipline in this society. I mean, I have seen people in the middle divide of an expressway. The divide in the middle of an expressway. The guy had a choice to go to one end or the other end, but he stays at the middle and peace. You can Google it, you may find it. Pissing in Nigeria, pissing. Anyway. But it is a metaphor for our indiscipline. The corrupt in all sectors, the corruption that is everywhere in our society, the level of deceit and falsehood, the degree of violence in our society, all these are against the values of the gospel. The epidemic of greed and avarice, the preponderance of fornication and adultery, the abuse of power and privilege, the refusal to love, to forgive, and to show mercy, the scandalous gap between the rich and the poor. These are not normal for children of God. Did you hear me? Yes. These are not normal for children of God. They are aberrations. We can't be part of this and call ourselves children of God. And if the gospel, if you read the gospel every day, if you hear the gospel every day and it doesn't challenge this in your life, then it is not the gospel you are reading. It's something else. Because the gospel is the most potent agent of individual and social transformation. Can we say that together? The gospel is the most potent agent of transformation of individuals and societies. There is a tendency today to take the fire out of the gospel of Christ. I'm going to be speaking later after communion on our conduct of harvest and how we have reduced everything to just looking for money, and we are ready to compromise every value in the book. If the gospel does not challenge the way we do things, then it is not the gospel you are preaching. Maybe you are reading a literature book. It's not the gospel. There is the tendency to take the fire out of the gospel so that it may be palatable, it may be acceptable to everybody. There is a tendency to read the gospel of its transforming influence, to reduce the message of Christ to some feel-good experience. I feel good. That is not what the gospel is meant to do, to make people feel good. And so we sit down in church, and every Sunday we sit down in church, then we even look for comedians to come and help us laugh. We are doing a disservice to the gospel. Yes, occasionally we can laugh, but people need to be told that where we are heading for is danger. People need to be woken off their stupor. Now, if they are laughing every day, you know, when you are laughing and rolling on the ground, can you think? The cognitive element of the brain doesn't work well when you are rolling on the ground laughing. When this happens, our feel-good, noisy services, when it happens, the leaven will lose its power. The salt will lose its taste, and the light will grow dim. Yes. If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. That's what Ekene said. If you don't stand up for something, you will fall for anything. I remember that I had that written in my little ordination card 38 years ago. If you don't stand up for something, you will fall for anything. From the day of my ordination, I made up my mind that I will stand up for something. Another way of putting it is what? Can you read? Those who stand for nothing will fall for anything. Another way of putting it is, when you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. Again, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Those who stand for nothing fall for anything. And when you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. There are many people that we don't know where they stand. We just don't know where they stand. Because anything that comes, they are part of it. Meaning, you are standing for nothing. Therefore, you are falling for everything. Standing for Jesus means standing against many things that run counter to the values of Jesus. If you are really a Christian, there will be many things in society that are popular, that are trendy, that you cannot be part of if you are really a Christian. Genuine loyalty to Christ's teaching is sure to rock the boat, causing division and conflict in the family, at work, in the society, as every committed Christian already knows. Any committed Christian living in our society today is in trouble, and it's going to be a troublemaker, because people are forgetting what the gospel is meant to be. At our baptism, we were anointed priests, prophets, and kings. We have often shied away from our prophetic mission. That's the one that has been most neglected, from our prophetic mission, which is to live out and proclaim God's undiluted truth. That is what it means that as baptized people, you are prophets. To live out, to proclaim the undiluted truth of God, like Jeremiah and Jesus Christ, and what our second reading calls the cloud of witnesses through history. All those who have lived the truth throughout history, the cloud of witnesses. We are challenged today to make a choice to stand for or against Jesus. All I was saying actually in the last 5 Sundays since I came back, all I was saying is simply this: who wants to stand with Jesus, for Jesus with me? Who agrees to stand for Jesus with me? And I have kept saying that the one that everybody is doing, I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to. And is there anyone who wants to journey with me and stand with Jesus? And if we agree to stand with Jesus, you will stand against many things. And it will bring you conflict. It will bring division. Standing for Jesus means more than the noisy but superficial enterprise that many of us call Christianity today. I'm tired of it. I have kept saying, I'm not part of it. Standing up for Jesus requires the grace of courage. Courage to speak and live out the truth in an environment of widespread falsehood. Courage to say no to everyone in the family or at work when our faith values are threatened. Courage to go it alone. Grow up. Don't seek to only join the crowd. Grow up and be ready to go it alone. Don't follow just what is trendy. And especially young people, take note. It's too much the disease of following what is trendy. The addiction just to follow what others are doing is too strong with young people. Grow up. And those of you who are 50, 60 years, who have not grown up, grow up. And be ready to stand alone. That's the only way of living the gospel. Jeremiah stood alone. Jesus stood alone. Courage to go it alone and endure suffering when it becomes necessary. This is what it means to be a Christian today in our society. Heavenly Father, we thank you, we praise you, we glorify your holy name for your many blessings. Thank you for your love and your goodness. Thank you for blessing us with examples like Jeremiah and Amos and Isaiah and Zephaniah and Baruch and Hosea and St. Paul and all the cloud of witnesses that our faith has been blessed with. Thank you for your son Jesus, who has come to establish this civilization of love, but also who has come to bring fire in the midst of decay to purify the world. to purify our hearts, to purify our society, to purify our families. Lord, help us to understand what this fire is all about. Help us to understand the conflict that believing in Jesus generates. Help us to embrace the double-edged sword that the gospel is, the one that afflicts the comfortable and comforts the afflicted. Help us to embrace the gospel with all its dimensions as the most powerful agent of individual and social transformation. Grant us the grace, for without your grace we can do nothing. Grant us the grace to experience true encounter with the gospel of Jesus and true transformation in our hearts, so that we ourselves, having been transformed, may become agents of transformation in our society through Christ our Lord.